Thanks, Matt. And thank you all for attending today's webinar on one of MicroStrategy's newest products, distribution services. As many of you know, the Lancecare team recently hosted a webinar on upgrading to MicroStrategy 9. That was a huge success, so we wanted to branch out into additional subject areas that we feel would be valuable to the MicroStrategy user community. For those of you who have not seen the upgrade webinar, I believe it is still available for viewing. For access, go to our website or send an email request to webinar@lancetsoftware.com. With that, I'd like to do a quick review of today's agenda. We have received numerous questions regarding distribution services. To many, it's unclear what exactly distribution services does, so we're going to cover that this afternoon. We also want to discuss some of the primary differences between Narrowcast server and distribution services. As Matt mentioned, to date we've completed numerous distribution services installations, so we wanted to discuss the migration path that is currently available from Narrowcast server. We'll provide an overview on managing users and subscriptions. And finally, we'll go over some of the lessons we've learned before answering the questions that have come through the chat window or through the question window throughout the webinar. With that, please enter any questions you have into the questions area, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible at the end of the session. Let's start with a brief overview. Many of you on the call today have used MicroStrategy Narrowcast server and are aware that with the release of 9.00, a new product was introduced called distribution services. This will assume a good portion of the roles previously held by Narrowcast server, but as we will discuss later on, Narrowcast will still be used in more advanced scenarios. So what is distribution services? It's a new product in MicroStrategy 9 that provides automated report and dashboard delivery through email, file servers, and printers. Of those, the most common delivery mechanism is email, but we do see file shares being used quite a bit as well. Distribution services can be used to deliver numerous output formats and make it possible to manage deliveries from a single metadata that is shared with the intelligence server. This also allows distribution services to inherit the architecture support that was previously only available for intelligence server. Some of the benefits of distribution services include high volume delivery to employees, partners, and customers, the ability to achieve higher efficiency with your existing hardware. It allows jobs to be scheduled and run during non-peak times. Reduced information latency by getting data to your users immediately once it becomes available. And also a reduced administration cost through user self-service. Distribution services now offers multi-platform support. As many of you know, Narrowcast server required Microsoft Windows Server. That dependency is now eliminated with distribution services, and it is now supported on all the same platforms as MicroStrategy Intelligence Server, AIX, HPUX, Linux, Solaris, and of course Windows. There's now a single shared metadata. Distribution services can potentially remove the need for any additional repository database, since all information is now stored in tables in the iServer metadata. There's also a single shared administration console. Distribution services is managed through MicroStrategy Desktop, eliminating the need for a secondary console for managing deliveries. Enhanced monitoring capabilities. With Narrowcast server, your monitoring options were fairly limited and disjointed from the intelligence server itself. Now you have the option and you're able to have a single log file and monitor usage and performance through Enterprise Manager, whereas before you could not do so. Some of the additional features include the ability to distribute all MicroStrategy reports and dashboards in numerous formats, Flash, PDF, HTML, Excel, and CSV. The ability to set up varying triggers for delivery. A distribution can be triggered by a predefined threshold set by the user, a event-driven schedule, or a time-driven schedule. Subscriptions can be set up and managed by end users and not just administrators. The self-service model greatly reduces the dependency on IT resources and on MicroStrategy administrators. And also, output can be personalized for each user through the use of security filters. Let's take a minute to look at some of the differences in the architecture between distribution services and Narrowcast. Previous versions of MicroStrategy required several repository databases. In version 8, the core iServer configuration and all objects were stored in 10 metadata tables. In addition to those tables, you had the Narrowcast repository database and the Narrowcast subscription book repository database. This has changed with the introduction of distribution services. Now this information is stored in a single database, which is the intelligent server metadata. Those additional databases are still needed if you intend to continue running Narrowcast, but if you move 100% of your services to distribution services, they will no longer be needed. Instead of having separate services for the various components of Narrowcast, such as the distribution engine, the execution engine, distribution services runs as part of the standard MSTR SVR intelligent server service. We've looked at a few of the high-level architecture differences. Now let's take a look at some of the feature differences and some of the new features in distribution services. Web deliveries and email subscriptions are now handled exclusively by distribution services, and additional file delivery formats are now supported. Reports can now be sent in plain text, and report service documents can now be sent in HTML, PDF, Excel, or Flash formats. Additional delivery options are also now available. You can choose to send reports to a user's history list in addition to an email address or file location. You actually have several options, including sending to email alone, email and history list, email with an attachment as well as a link to history list, or just an email with a link to history list. Whereas Narrowcast server in the past only supported web deliveries via email. Personalization can be applied to multiple recipients and distribution services. In Narrowcast, personalization could only be applied to a single recipient. There are also some additional features with schedules. Narrowcast schedules cannot be configured with a predefined end date. Distribution services allows you to define both a start and an end date for a schedule. For example, if you wanted to send a document only between the 5th and the 10th of the month, previously with Narrowcast, you had to manually enable that schedule on the 5th and disable it on the 10th. With distribution services, you can set that schedule to start on the 5th and expire on the 10th. So there's no manual intervention required. On the administration side, Narrowcast allowed a user to set the number and date format preference. Distribution services allows for a much more robust internationalization setting, such as choosing a language preference, allowing for users to always access all data in their language of choice. And this goes along with all the personalization and internationalization enhancements that are throughout version 9. Scheduling enhancements for web deliveries have been made, allowing for both time and event-triggered schedules to be used, whereas Narrowcast only allowed time-based schedules to be used for web deliveries. And also in the area of subscription monitoring, there was no way to monitor and manage subscriptions in Narrowcast. Subscription Manager is now part of the Intelligent Server Administrator console within MicroStrategy Desktop, so you can view and edit all subscriptions from within that console. You also get enhanced load balancing. Because it's now integrated into the intelligent server, distribution services can fully utilize the benefits of clustering and load balancing. Next, I want to review what roles can be assumed by distribution services and which ones are still going to require Narrowcast server. This tends to be the main area of confusion with a lot of our customers. So hopefully this helps clear it up, and if you still have questions afterwards, I will do my best to answer any at that time. First, web deliveries can be migrated from Narrowcast to distribution services. In fact, you're required to migrate them when upgrading to version 9, and all subscriptions in the Narrowcast repository will be deleted when upgrading Narrowcast from version 8 to version 9. Most services can be recreated in distribution services without losing any functionality. If you're using Narrowcast to send out a flash dashboard to top executives, for example, that can be recreated fairly easy in distribution services. If you're using Narrowcast only for Web Send Now, distribution services will take over that role and Narrowcast will no longer be needed. If you're sending out a single report or document as a PDF or Excel file, those can be recreated in distribution services as well. If you're currently using Narrowcast to send out services with multiple attachments, they can be created and migrated to distribution services. However, they'll need to be created as separate subscriptions, each with one single attachment. One other option that you may have if you're sending out a service with multiple grids, you may want to look into combining those grid reports into a report services document. So what cannot be transitioned from Narrowcast at this time? If you have Narrowcast services that utilize dynamic subscription sets, those will need to remain in Narrowcast, as distribution services does not support dynamic subscription sets at this time. Also, if you use Excel templates to embed multiple grid reports in a single Excel workbook across multiple Excel worksheets, those services must also remain in Narrowcast at this time. Any service that's using an information source or an ISM that is not the MicroStrategy intelligence server, that would have to remain in Narrowcast, as distribution services only supports intelligence server as a data source. Finally, any Narrowcast service that's running pre or post SQL cannot be migrated at this time if you wish to retain the pre and post SQL on those services. And what we do from our past experience, we recommend documenting all of your services that you currently have in Narrowcast and evaluating whether each one can be migrated to distribution services or whether they must remain in Narrowcast. This is also a good idea to do for any future services that you plan or are planning on creating. Once you have that, you can create a roadmap for your services, and that's a great way to understand what features of Narrowcast you require and maybe which ones you've used simply because they were there but you don't necessarily need. And you can go ahead and move those services or subscriptions to distribution services. So you know about distribution services. You've identified what can move and what cannot move away from Narrowcast. And hopefully by now you've decided that most, if not all, future deliveries will be handled by distribution services. So now it's time to install. As long as you're licensed for distribution services, it'll be available as a subcategory underneath the intelligence server in the installation wizard. Since it's a component of intelligence server, it's simply checking a box to enable it, and no additional software actually needs to be installed. First, let's touch on the process flow for the upgrade a little bit. First, you'll need to upgrade the intelligence server and install distribution services. Once that's done, you'll need to run the configuration wizard against your existing intelligent server metadata, and this will allow you to create new tables that will be used by distribution services. Once the tables are created, you need to run the migration wizard from desktop to import web deliveries from within the Narrowcast repository. You have several options regarding choices for conflict resolution within this wizard. You can define how you want to handle duplicates and schedules, devices, and information transmitters. You also have the option to bring over only users with web subscriptions, all Narrowcast users, or no users at all. I do want to throw out a warning stating that we have seen issues with this wizard at a couple of our clients. Recreated manually after the migration. So if you have a lot of web subscriptions that are critical, it's important to document each and every one of them before running the migration wizard. Unfortunately, at this time, there's no out-of-box method for doing this, and collecting this data requires the creation of some SQL scripts to generate a list of subscriptions, reports, and subscribers. The Lancecare team has created such scripts for several clients, and they've proven to be extremely valuable. Once that migration is done, finally the last step is to upgrade the Narrowcast repository. This is done just as it was with all previous versions. However, again, to point out, this will delete web deliveries from the Narrowcast repository, so you will want to make sure that all your deliveries migrated successfully, and if not, you have a valid backup before executing this step. User management is an area we receive a lot of questions on, and after migrating is a good time to review how users are set up and licensed within distribution services. To do so, let's start by looking at the licensing model previously used by Narrowcast server. In Narrowcast, a user consumes a license once they are added to the subscription book repository. A user can have more than one address, for example, one email or two emails and a file location, but you cannot send to a recipient without that recipient having a MicroStrategy license. Distribution Services adds to that flexibility by providing the ability for quote-unquote named user to have multiple addresses that they can send reports to. If those addresses don't have access to MicroStrategy directly, either through web or through desktop, they do not consume a MicroStrategy license. In distribution services, you have two different types of what I'll call recipients. The first is users. Users access MicroStrategy through either web or desktop, and a user will have privileges and permissions assigned to them that defines what actions they can perform and what objects they can access. In order for a user to use distribution services, they must have the appropriate level of privileges and permissions. Those privileges include, but are not limited to, receiving subscriptions, creating new subscriptions, creating new subscription addresses, whether it be file or print, and having the ability to link or unlink a contact to a particular user. With that, we also have another recipient, which they refer to as a contact. Contacts are like users in that they can receive messages through email, through file, and through print. However, they don't have access to MicroStrategy via either MicroStrategy desktop or web to run reports or documents. Essentially, having contacts allows a user to send reports to recipients that do not otherwise have access to MicroStrategy. A few notes on contacts. Contacts cannot log into MicroStrategy. Contacts cannot subscribe themselves to a report or document. A user must do that for them. A contact is always linked to a user and will use the security of the user they're linked to. For example, if user John has a security filter applied to his user, any contact linked to John will use that same security filter. You also have the option to create contact groups, which essentially work the same as the email distribution groups you use today. For example, all marketing contacts would be members of the marketing contact group. This simplifies the process when a user wants to subscribe the entire group to a report. Instead of subscribing each user individually, they can simply subscribe the contact group and all users will receive the report. I also want to touch on user management and in addition to user management, touch on managing subscriptions. Previously, it was difficult to manage web subscriptions. With version 9 and distribution services, you can do so right from MicroStrategy Desktop. You simply, under administration, expand configuration managers and subscriptions, and that'll give you a complete list of all subscriptions, along with the ability to view more information about each subscription, which also includes report name, subscription type, recipient, project name, and schedule. You also have the ability to unsubscribe users and contacts from within this console. Additional methods for controlling subscription activities, not necessarily subscription specifically, but governing settings, for example, and thresholds. Those can be accessed in the project configuration under both the caching and delivery subcategories. One of the most popular sections of our previous webinars was our lessons learned sections, and sharing some of the tips and tricks that we picked up through our upgrade experience thus far with version 9. So we wanted to continue that with distribution services. The first one, stop adding new services to Narrowcast as soon as possible. We tell new customers to always try and accomplish a task in distribution services first, and only if they need additional functionality such as dynamic subscription sets or multi-sheet Excel templates should they use Narrowcast Server. The most recent installations we've done, we've installed Narrowcast, but we've actually turned off the services. If there's no reason to move forward with an architecture that's more complicated than needed, we try to not do it. Next, take extra care before upgrading to version 9 to understand what types of Narrowcast services you have in your environment. Keep in mind, all web deliveries and send now functionality roles will be migrated away from Narrowcast and to distribution services, and part of this means that those will be deleted from the Narrowcast repository as soon as you upgrade Narrowcast. Because of this, you want to make sure you take a backup of your Narrowcast repository and subscription book repository databases. You also want to generate a list of all web subscriptions along with recipients, reports included, and the schedules they use ahead of time. Do not assume these will migrate without issue. Also, do budget some post-migration cleanup time. Depending on the makeup of your environment, some level of contact and address cleanup will be required after migrating. Do understand that it may not be possible to migrate all of your Narrowcast data to distribution services at this time. Hopefully, all features of Narrowcast will be included in future releases of distribution services, but until that happens, it may be required to run both products in parallel. Finally, do create a migration roadmap for all of your Narrowcast services. It's always a good idea to know what you have today, what can be migrated right away, and what needs to remain in Narrowcast Server for the time being. Before the Q&A begins, I wanted to go over a few of the known issues that our team as well as others have encountered. Error handling issues in version 9. In distribution services, just as you can in Narrowcast Server, you can set error handling rules. What happens if a report fails? And there's actually an issue where despite setting the report to not deliver when no data is returned, an email is still sent without any data. This is fixed in 901, so if you've already upgraded to 900, you can do the incremental upgrade to 901 to take advantage of the fix. The second issue, and this is the one that I believe is the most critical, subscriptions are skipped when migrating web delivery subscriptions from Narrowcast to distribution services. Again, this is the one I alluded to earlier in the presentation, and the reason why it's absolutely critical to document your web subscriptions before running the migration wizard and make sure you have valid backups before upgrading. The missing subscriptions have been found to happen in two different scenarios. One, there are missing user or address entries in certain tables. Or two, there are many-to-many relationships between subscription sets and schedules within the web delivery services in Narrowcast server. What you will see is that when migrating web delivery subscriptions from Narrowcast to distribution services, subscriptions are skipped, or a certain subset of subscriptions are skipped, but other objects such as schedules and users are migrated without issue. To fix this issue, you can do one of two things. You can either manually create or recreate the missing subscriptions, or remove the many-to-many relationships between subscription sets and your schedules before upgrading to version 9. Finally, we have seen issues where the links to a user's history list is broken in the email received from distribution services. Again, this is another known issue with MicroStrategy Distribution Services 900, except this one is specific to WebSphere. The link is broken because the URL, the word servlet in the URL is actually being replaced with JSP. The issue is fixed in 901. So again, if you're running 900, if you're an early adopter and would like to take advantage of the fix, go ahead and do the incremental upgrade, and that will take care of the issue for you. These are three of the issues we've seen during previous upgrades. Again, we recommend that you spend some time searching the MicroStrategy knowledge base during the planning phase of your upgrade so that you can get a better understanding of other issues that may be relevant to your environment and your situation. With that, I will turn the controls back over to Matt Cox.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jesse. So we've been fielding questions throughout the presentation, and we'll get to those shortly. And basically, with the remainder of the time, we'll just be spending answering those questions. So if you have any other questions that you thought of during the presentation, just use the chat option, or there's a question option where you can submit those questions, and we'll get to those. When we're done here today, we'll send out a quick email asking for a little bit of feedback. We just asked you spend a minute or two and answer a few questions. Basically, what did you like? What could be improved? And then a big question we have is, what other topics would you like to hear webinars on? Our hope is to provide a new webinar every month, and we'd like to cover topics that are either concerning to you or just topics that you'd like to learn more about. So we have some different ideas of our own, but if there's certain topics that are hot on your mind that you'd like us to see addressed in a webinar, then please let us know. So look for that email within the next couple days here. And then quickly, I just want to do a quick overview of Lancet. For those of you who don't know us, Lancet was founded in 1997. We just celebrated our 13th birthday on July 1st. We're a group of business intelligence consultants based out of Minneapolis, and we specialize mainly in MicroStrategy clients. And we've created a number of different service lines that you can see on the slide, and I will very briefly go over each one. Lancet Pro is our group of our traditional consultants that you think of. They include architects, report developers, dashboard developers, data modelers, and project managers. And so we provide staff augmentation as well as full project support. Now, Lancet Care is the group that Jesse and I work with. This is remote managed services for MicroStrategy platform administration. Basically, our customers pay a monthly subscription rate. we take care of the administration of MicroStrategy for them. And we also provide ad hoc services like installs, upgrades, and audits, things like that. Lancet On Demand is a solution we have for remote rapid report development. So it's good for projects where you need to turn out many reports in a short period of time. It's basically an opportunity to add a number of sets of hands to your project to be able to turn out a lot of reports. And then our Lancet Dev group is a group that provides custom development within the MicroStrategy framework. So they include work with custom widgets, SDK development, and portal integration, to name a few things. And then the last offering we have is Lancet Coach, which is our more senior consultants who help provide guidance for examples of new installations, or if you're rolling out a new project within MicroStrategy. It's kind of senior level consultants who can kind of give you guidelines on how to do this, and instead of actually doing the work for you, they'll kind of coach you through it. Here are the steps that you should take, and then let you actually perform the work. So that's Lancet, but we want to mainly get back to Q&A. So we'll stay online here for as long as we have questions, and then when the questions dry up, we'll just drop off. So the first question we have is it possible to deliver a Flash dashboard to a user group that may have sub-user groups that all have different security filters? And so I think the answer to this is yes, and the way you would basically do that is using the contact groups that Jesse talked about. And Jesse, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically you create a single report and you subscribe it out to a number of contacts or to a contact group, and then those contacts are linked to a user, and the output of the report will be based on that user's security filter. So you could subscribe one report and it may go out to 5 different users who have 5 different security filters, and therefore they get 5 different versions of that report. So similar to Narrowcast, but basically in that case you would use contact groups for that.
Yeah, the key is within those groups you actually have to have users who are valid users in MicroStrategy versus simply being a contact. A contact cannot have a security filter applied to it, however a user can.
Another question we have is, are simple Narrowcast services converted to distribution services through the migration wizard? And I assume that's the migration wizard as part of the upgrade process. And quick answer for that is currently no. That wizard simply moves web subscriptions. Your services, your standard Narrowcast services remain in Narrowcast and must later be manually migrated to distribution services.
And a good follow-up to that is another question that we got. Will there be a wizard in the future to move Narrowcast services to distribution services? We don't know at this time. As of today, one does not exist. Currently, the wizard only moves those web deliveries and subscriptions. But if one does exist, we will be the first ones to come out and put a webinar on it.
Another question is it possible to continue to create new services in Narrowcast Server in version 9? And yes, so basically Narrowcast Server continues to work as it did today. We recommend, as Jesse talked about, we recommend any new service, once you're up on distribution services, any new service, you try to create it using distribution services. And if for the different reasons Jesse outlined, if you can't, then you should continue to use Narrowcast. And the key point there is just that at some point, Narrowcast Server is going to go away, and that's when all that functionality exists in distribution services. So at some point, there's going to be a conversion from Narrowcast to distribution services. So the more we create Narrowcast, the bigger that conversion process becomes later. So we're just telling people, do everything you can to get it in distribution services now, and if you just can't do it, then use Narrowcast.
We have a question that we mentioned that some web subscriptions did not come over with one of the installs that we did when running the wizard. They want us to be a little more specific about which subscriptions didn't come over. The issue was specifically tied to the known issue that is on the MicroStrategy knowledge base. And if anyone's interested in getting that knowledge base article number, I have it, just not right in front of me. But essentially, if there's missing fields or many-to-many relationships, the wizard cannot resolve those subscriptions, so it will just drop the subscriptions from coming over. Another question, what tools do we have to use to compare, or what have we used to compare the results of the migration wizard from Narrowcast to distribution services? We've used just about everything available. We've done manual documentation of subscriptions. We've done SQL queries that have run over the top of the Narrowcast and subscription book repositories. And we've also used user screenshots of subscriptions to recreate the ones that did not come across.
We have a question. We have a lot of Narrowcast services that export data to Excel spreadsheets. Can those services be moved to distribution services? And for the most part, the answer to that is yes. The exception is if you use Excel templates. So a lot of companies use, they'll put the headings and they'll put maybe even some macros in an Excel, and then they'll merge the output of a report with that Excel template. In that case, you need to continue to use Narrowcast. And then also, as Jesse mentioned, multiple output to multiple tabs will continue to be done through Narrowcast. But if you're simply exporting a report to Excel and it's a blank Excel, then that would be no problem. You can start using that in distribution services. Basically, it's subscribe to report and output is Excel as opposed to HTML.
Another question came in. Most of our services are dynamic subscriptions with pre- and post-SQL. Do we know if MicroStrategy is planning to have this feature in distribution services in future releases? I wish I could give you a firm, solid answer on that. I do not know. From what I've heard, they plan to migrate all Narrowcast functionality to distribution services in future releases. The definition of future releases, as far as how many releases it'll take, I think is still up in the air. But my belief and my understanding is that that's their intent. We're just not quite there yet.
Right. It's definitely their stated intent to replace Narrowcast with distribution services. We just don't know how quickly that's going to happen.
So another question, how is clustering different in distribution services versus Narrowcast server? With Narrowcast server, it was, and I guess it still is in version 9, a standalone component. There was some limited clustering options, failover options available with the distribution managers and the execution engines within Narrowcast. However, the logic wasn't as good for load balancing as it was, or as it is in the intelligence server. So with the inclusion of distribution services within the intelligence server metadata, you get a lot more robust load balancing, a lot smarter load balancing, and an overall more stable environment.
We don't have any more questions. If we'll wait a little bit longer, and if anybody has any more that we haven't addressed yet. Also, if you think of questions after we end the call, you can send an email to webinar@lancetsoftware.com, and we'll address those questions. So like, question just came in. Have you come across any Narrowcast metadata corruptions when upgrading Narrowcast 8 to Narrowcast 9?
I can take this one, Matt. One of the benefits of how the actual Narrowcast upgrade tool works, or the repository upgrade tool, is that it'll go through all the changes that it's going to do, but it won't commit them until you tell it to commit. So if there's an error, it's going to roll back any changes. That said, I definitely have seen situations where the wizard doesn't complete successfully, and I've had to rerun the upgrade wizard. But I've never actually had it corrupt the metadata. Certain times, actually 2 or 3, I believe, I've seen where the upgrade has taken quite a long time, to the point where previous upgrades would take 15 minutes to upgrade the repository. The one to version 9 is taking an hour or more. And right when I'm beginning to think that it's locked up or it's corrupted, it'll resume. You'll get the progress bar back on the screen, and it'll complete successfully.
It seems that the truth of the matter is there just haven't been a lot of enhancements to Narrowcast, and that will probably continue to be true. And so with that, you don't see as many corruptions with the upgrade because there's just not as many changes to the software.
Another question came in, are we seeing better performance on report delivery via distribution services versus Narrowcast server? It depends. I can definitely say that I feel that distribution service is a lot more reliable than Narrowcast or previous versions of Narrowcast server has been. In a lot of environments, Narrowcast server is kind of a bit of an afterthought when planning your architecture. So companies will spec out big beefy servers for intelligent server and for web server, and then, we also need this server to send out emails. So it's not always as robust as it could be. Also, previous scenarios, intelligent server, web server was running on larger, more stable Linux or Unix boxes, whereas the Narrowcast server was running on Windows, and the services just weren't as reliable, I think, as many of us had hoped. You see a lot of inconsistent behavior, some crashing, and I think for anyone who has used Narrowcast at any length, moving to distribution services is a welcome change, and I think a lot of us are looking forward to seeing a lot more of the functionality brought in with future releases.
The other feedback we've heard is that it's much more user-friendly. It's basically it's within the same interface, and you basically can subscribe to a particular report that you're used to working with, as opposed to having to go into a different console and setting up a different kind of an object. You're setting up a service with a subscription book, where this is a little bit more user-friendly and more in tune with what they're used to.
And on that note, the previous way for determining success or failure for an individual for whether or not they received an email in Narrowcast was to actually manually write SQL queries against the transmission recording tables in the Narrowcast repository. That's changed greatly with version 9 and distribution services. All that is either in the DSS error logs that are the log file for the intelligence server, and you can also report on delivery success and failure, as well as usage from within Enterprise Manager in version 9. So your management and your monitoring are a lot more robust as we move forward in version 9.
We have a really good question that just came in. When 90% of subscriptions are dynamic and Excel template based, do you even recommend upgrading to Narrowcast 8? Can we just run Narrowcast? Is Narrowcast 8 compatible with Intelligent Server 9? And that's an important question, an important answer, which is no. That beginning with version 9.0.1, MicroStrategy components are not backwards compatible with the intelligence server. So that includes the web server as well as Narrowcast and desktop. So once you've upgraded to 9.0.1, you can no longer run Narrowcast version 8.
But I also want to point out that the path that MicroStrategy has taken, Narrowcast hasn't gone away in version 9. It's still there. Some of the functionality, such as the send now web deliveries, you are forced to utilize distribution services for that functionality. But the other functionality, the dynamic subscription sets, the multi-worksheet Excel templates, the pre and post SQL, those are still available to you in Narrowcast version 9. And typically what companies are doing is they're running distribution services in Narrowcast in parallel. So they're getting web subscriptions migrated over to distribution services and only running what can't migrate yet at this time in Narrowcast server. And then gradually we've created migration roadmaps for clients to where we identify what services can move right away, the basic services, one attachment, be it a flash dashboard or a PDF or whatever. Those are easy to create new subscriptions for, whereas the more advanced subscriptions, 10 worksheet Excel templates, each with their own greater document in them, those obviously are more complex and probably not going to be able to be moved into distribution services at this time. But that doesn't, I don't want that to make it seem like you can't upgrade to version 9 and take advantage of all the other great advantages of version 9, because those features are still available in Narrowcast version 9.
Yeah, I don't think we've done an upgrade where they were using Narrowcast before, and as part of the upgrade, we eliminated Narrowcast and they're completely using distribution services. Basically, we're handling those as separate projects. So first upgrade to Narrowcast, and then at a later date start converting things from Narrowcast to distribution services.
Right. It is good as you create new services and or subscriptions to take a little bit closer look than maybe you did in the past and see what features of Narrowcast are you really using, and what can be migrated today, or what new services could just be created in distribution services today, instead of having to continue to create new content or services in Narrowcast. The idea, we just try and recommend that customers start thinking about moving away from Narrowcast whenever possible, as much as they can.
Good questions. We're happy to keep answering them if they keep coming up. So it looks like that's about it. If you have any more questions, you think of it as soon as we end the call. Like I said, just send the question to webinar at lancesoftware.com. And we appreciate everybody's time. We'll be sending out the quick forms for feedback. It'll just be an email. If we ask you just reply back to that and give us some quick feedback. We'll be doing a recording of this and putting it on our website as well for future reference.
And I believe that information of how to access that will be included in the email.
We'll put that in the email.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone, very much for attending.